Before going for a run, you warm up. Before a game of paddle, you loosen your shoulders and do a few jumps in place. Before lifting weights at the gym, you do a light set to get into it. Before walking, you do absolutely nothing. You get out of bed and walk. You get up from your chair after 3 hours of meetings and walk. You get out of the car and walk. Between 5 and 10,000 times a day, you start up the most used machinery in your body without giving it a single second's warning. For many years that cost nothing. The body has margin and uses it. The problem appears when that margin narrows, and after a certain age it narrows in one very specific place that almost nobody watches. Think about the first 20 steps of your morning, from the bedroom to the bathroom. What are they like? If you're over 50, chances are they're short, a little wooden, with stiff ankles, and after 2 or 3 minutes you're walking normally and forget about it. Think also about when you get up from the couch after a movie. That first stride where your calf seems to have come up short, or how your ankles feel at the end of a long day, with the sock mark pressed into the skin. Add 2 more that you probably haven't connected to anything either. The nighttime calf cramp that wakes you up and forces you to stretch your leg against the sheet, and the feeling, going downstairs, that your foot lands with a dull thud on each step instead of landing softly. You've filed each of these away separately. Circulation, age, sitting too long, bad sleeping posture. They all point to the same place, to the back of your ankle, where there's a cord about as thick as a finger that withstands 3 or 4 times your body weight every time you take a step, and up to 9 times if you start running. It's the thickest, strongest tendon you have. It's called the Achilles tendon, and it holds a property almost nobody associates with it. That tendon behaves like a spring. Every time your foot strikes the ground, it stretches, catches the impact energy, and gives it back to you on the next step. It works for free. It doesn't burn sugar, doesn't use oxygen, doesn't fatigue the way a muscle fatigues. It's giving you a considerable share of the effort of walking and running, asking nothing in return. Over the years, that spring loses tension. It doesn't hurt, doesn't warn you, doesn't show up on any test. It simply gives back less, and your muscles, which do burn fuel and do get tired, have to make up the difference. That's why walking starts to cost a little more without you being able to explain why. The title of this video says only 2% know how to activate it. Nobody has measured that exact figure, and I won't pretend otherwise. What is true, and what I see constantly, is that practically nobody prepares the ankle before walking, and that the move needed takes 90 seconds and can be done barefoot next to the bed. Over the next few minutes, I want to show you 4 things. How that spring works, with real physics and real anatomy. Who the muscle is that loads it. A muscle that also does a second job inside your body that will surprise you. Why the system degrades after 50, and what signals it's already sending. And the exact 90-second protocol, plus what needs to happen long-term for the spring to genuinely regain tension. Let's start with the piece that carries your Greek surname. Put your hand on the back of your ankle, just above the heel, and pinch it between your fingers. That hard cord you feel is the Achilles tendon. Above it joins the calf muscles. Below it anchors into the heel bone, the calcaneus. It measures between 4 and 6 inches, and in an adult is roughly as thick as a thumb. It's the strongest tendon in the human body, and bears loads no other structure that size could withstand. The name comes from the Greek hero whose mother dipped him in the river Styx, holding him by the heel, leaving that one spot unprotected. The irony is considerable, because what the myth turned into a symbol of weakness is, in biomechanics, one of the best pieces of engineering we have. For decades, physiology treated tendons as cables, passive straps that transmit force from muscle to bone and little else. The muscle was the star, the tendon just the connecting cable. That description fell apart once researchers began measuring what actually happens inside the tissue during movement. A tendon deforms under load. It stretches a little, a few millimeters, and in doing so stores elastic energy in its collagen structure. When the load disappears, it springs back to its original length and releases much of that energy. It's the same physics that makes a compressed metal spring jump or a stretched rubber band snap back. In 1987, Robert Kerr and his team published a paper in Nature titled "The Spring in the Arch of the Human Foot," directly measuring how much energy the human foot stores and returns with each step. It was one of the studies that changed how we understand connective tissue. Robert McNeill Alexander, the British biomechanist who spent his career on this line of research, described the system precisely. Much of the efficiency of human locomotion is delegated to elastic structures that work at no metabolic cost. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Watch the exact moment it happens. You're running at an easy pace. Your body is briefly in the air, then the foot comes down and lands. At that landing, the leg absorbs a force equal to 2, 3, or 4 times your body weight. A 150-pound person receives on a single leg the equivalent of over 400 pounds on every stride, hundreds of times per mile. That force has to go somewhere. At the moment of landing, the ankle flexes, the heel tends to drop, and the Achilles tendon stretches. The impact energy, which would otherwise be lost as vibration and heat against the ground, gets trapped inside the stretched tissue. A split second later, as the body passes over the foot and it's time to push off the ground, the tendon recoils and releases in a burst what it had stored. That release propels the leg into the next step. Biomechanics estimates put the elastic return of the Achilles tendon and foot arch system at around 30 to 40% of the energy needed for each running stride. Roughly 1 in every 3 pushes isn't produced by your muscles burning glucose. The tissue gives it back. That detail explains something about our species that's otherwise hard to understand. Humans are mediocre sprinters. A dog beats us, a horse beats us, a house cat leaves us behind over 20 yards. But over long distances, in the heat, trained humans are among the best animals on the planet. Dennis Bramble and Daniel Lieberman published a paper in Nature in 2004, Endurance Running and the Evolution of Homo, gathering the anatomical traits that make that capacity possible. The long, elastic Achilles tendon is among them. Our closest relatives don't have it. Chimpanzees have a very short Achilles and are terrible distance runners. The extreme case of this design is in Australia. Kangaroos move by hopping, and the tendons in their hind legs return such a high proportion of energy that, past a certain speed, going faster barely costs them more oxygen. They bounce along on recycled energy. You have a more modest version of the same invention. And unlike the kangaroo, you can stop using it. Before moving on, there's a distinction that changes how you apply all of this. Because walking and running don't load the spring the same way. Running has a flight phase where both feet are off the ground, followed by a hard landing. That big impact is what stretches the tendon fully. Running is, at bottom, a series of bounces. Walking always has one foot on the ground. The impact is much smaller, and the body moves more like a pendulum, exploiting a different kind of energy savings. The Achilles spring still works, but it contributes less. That's where the second elastic piece of the system comes in, one that works specifically while walking and that very few people know about. Look at the sole of your foot. From the heel bone to the base of the toes, there's a thick band of tissue, the plantar fascia, that supports the arch from below like a bowstring. In 1954, anatomist J.H. Hicks described a mechanism, now named after him, that occurs with every step you take. When the toes extend upward at push-off, the plantar fascia winds around the heads of the metatarsal bones, tightens, and lifts the arch. The foot, which until that instant was soft and adapting to the terrain, suddenly becomes a rigid lever capable of pushing against the ground. Hicks called it the windlass mechanism, after the crank device that tightens a cable by winding it. The detail that matters: this mechanism is triggered by toe extension. If, while walking, you lift your foot halfway through the step without finishing it over the toes, the windlass doesn't fully engage, the arch doesn't tighten, and the foot never stiffens enough to push. You lose the arch's savings on top of the Achilles savings. It's a movement of millimeters, and it happens thousands of times a day. A spring doesn't load itself. Someone has to tighten it, control how far it stretches, and decide when to release it. In your ankle, that job belongs to the calf muscles, and it's worth separating them, because they aren't interchangeable. The one on top, the visible one, the one that shapes the calf when someone stands on tiptoe, is the gastrocnemius. It has two heads and crosses two joints. It originates above the knee and ends at the heel. Because it crosses the knee, its effective length depends on whether that knee is straight or bent. Underneath, hidden, there's another muscle, flatter, wider, and almost nobody names it, the soleus. It originates below the knee, so it only crosses the ankle. The two join together to form the Achilles tendon. The soleus has an unusual fiber composition. In most people, around 80% of its fibers are slow twitch, fatigue-resistant fibers that can keep working for hours without tiring. That profile has a reason. The soleus is the muscle that keeps you from falling forward while standing. Check it now if you're sitting down. Stand up, stay still, arms relaxed, and pay attention to your calves. You'll notice constant, small activity, coming and going. Your body sways forward by millimeters due to gravity, and the soleus pulls back to correct it. It's been doing that every minute you've spent standing, your entire life, and it does a second job, unrelated to movement, that deserves a full explanation. Your heart pushes blood down toward your legs very well, because gravity helps. The return trip is the problem. Getting blood from your ankles back up to your chest, against gravity, at much lower pressure than arterial pressure, needs help. Inside the veins of your legs there are valves, small one-way doors that let blood pass upward and close to stop it from flowing back down. Those valves don't pump anything on their own. They need something to push. That something is your calves. Every time the soleus contracts, it squeezes the deep veins running through it and pushes blood upward to the next valve. Then it relaxes, the valve below closes, and the blood stays a notch closer to the heart. Contraction, push, close, step by step. Physiologists call the calf the second heart, and the label has earned its place. Every step you take is a heartbeat of that pump. And here's a nuance that escapes a lot of people who've spent money trying to solve this. The pump switches on with muscle contraction, not with posture. If you buy a standing desk and stay planted there like a statue for 4 hours, feet still, legs motionless, your calf pump is doing exactly what it would if you were sitting. Nothing. In fact, standing still has its own problems. Blood pools just the same due to gravity. Joints bear constant load, and the lower back suffers. Jobs where people stand still all day have their own set of venous problems, and they don't come out ahead of desk jobs. The variable that matters isn't sitting versus standing. It's still versus moving. When you sit for 3 hours without moving, the pump shuts off. Blood pools in the lower legs, hence the swollen ankles after a long flight, and the leaden leg feeling at the end of a desk-bound day. That heaviness doesn't come from effort, it comes from the lack of it. And there's another layer, a metabolic one, that has come to light in recent years. Mark Hamilton, a physiologist at the University of Houston, has spent 2 decades studying what happens in muscle when we stop using it. His group described how the activity of lipoprotein lipase, the enzyme that pulls fat out of the blood and into the muscle to be burned, drops sharply during prolonged muscular inactivity. It's one of the reasons hours of sitting carry their own metabolic consequences, separate from whether or not you go to the gym. In 2022, the same group published a paper in iScience on what they called sustained soleus contraction. They showed that keeping that muscle working continuously, even while seated, noticeably raised fat oxidation and improved blood sugar regulation for hours afterward. The soleus, thanks to its slow twitch fiber profile, can sustain that work far longer than other muscles, without tiring. So that hidden muscle at the back of your leg does 3 things at once. It loads the spring that saves you energy while walking. It pushes blood back up to your heart. And it plays a role in how your body handles the sugar and fat circulating in your blood. It's probably the muscle with the worst ratio of importance to attention received in the entire human body. A tendon looks like a stable, almost inert structure, and that impression is misleading in one sense and quite accurate in another. It's worth understanding both. Let's start with what does change. Tendon stiffness is the property that determines how much energy it returns. A tendon that's too soft stretches a lot and gives back little, like an old rubber band. A tendon with the right stiffness deforms just enough and releases almost everything it stored. With age and lack of loading, that stiffness is lost. At the same time comes sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass associated with aging, which from age 30 onward progresses at a rate of roughly 3 to 8% per decade and accelerates after 60. The calf isn't spared. Less muscle to load the spring, and less spring to give back. The combined result shows up in the way people walk. Paul De Vita and Tibor Hortobagi published a widely cited study in the Journal of Applied Physiology in 2000. Comparing gait in older versus younger adults, they found a redistribution of joint work. The ankle contributes noticeably less power at push-off, and the hip compensates by doing more work than it used to. In practice, the final push of the foot against the ground weakens, and the hip pulls the leg forward to keep the step going. It works. It costs more energy. And it's one reason walking tires you out sooner at 70 than at 40, even at the same speed. Now for what almost doesn't change, the most surprising part of this chapter. In 2013, Katja Heinemeier and Michael Kjær from the Institute of Sports Medicine in Copenhagen published a study that made use of a historical quirk. Atmospheric nuclear tests in the 1950s and 60s spiked carbon-14 levels in the atmosphere, and that signal got recorded in tissues formed at each point in time. By measuring carbon-14 in the collagen of human Achilles tendons, they could date when that tissue had actually been made. The result, the core of the Achilles tendon, is essentially formed during childhood and adolescence, and after that it barely gets renewed. The material you're walking on today was mostly manufactured before you turned 17. Think for a moment about what that means. Almost all your tissues get recycled. Skin renews in weeks. Bone remodels continuously throughout life. The core of your Achilles, by contrast, is practically the same tendon you ran around the schoolyard with, and it's going to stay with you to the end. That has two consequences, one uncomfortable and one useful. The uncomfortable one: accumulated damage in the tendon's core repairs far worse than we assume, which is why Achilles injuries take months to heal and relapse so easily. The useful one: although the core barely renews, the outer layer and the muscle-tendon junction do respond to loading, and the mechanical properties of the whole unit can genuinely be improved with training at any age. This is well documented. Michael Kjær and Peter Magnusson in Copenhagen have spent years showing that mechanical loading stimulates collagen synthesis and changes tendon stiffness, even in older adults. What changes compared to a young person is the speed, not the possibility. There's an anatomical detail that explains why this particular tendon forgives so little. Blood supply to the Achilles isn't uniform. The area roughly 1 to 2.5 inches above its insertion into the heel gets less blood flow than the rest, and that's precisely where most tendinopathies and ruptures concentrate. Less blood means fewer nutrients, fewer repair cells, and slower recovery. Alongside this is a physical property of the tissue that will matter in the final chapter. Tendons are viscoelastic, meaning their mechanical behavior depends on the speed at which you load them and on temperature. A cold tendon, after 8 hours of overnight rest, is stiffer and responds worse than that same tendon after a few minutes of gentle movement. That's the physical explanation for something you notice every morning and probably chalked up to age. And there's a third factor, one you fully control. Your ankle almost never goes through its full range of motion. Flat, even floors, thick-soled shoes that cushion impact, and rigid heel counters that limit ankle movement. Elevators instead of stairs, driving right up to the door. Few hills, little uneven grass, little sand, little time on the balls of your feet. When a body structure stops receiving the load it was designed for, it downgrades. That's true of bone, true of muscle, and true of tendon. An Achilles that hasn't been asked for a full push-off in 20 years is an Achilles that has lost spring capacity simply because nobody demanded it. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. This system warns you before it fails. The problem is its warnings are so undramatic they get mistaken for the simple passage of time. The first is morning stiffness at the back of the ankle. The first steps of the day feel tight, a bit clumsy, with the sense that the calf has come up short, and within 3 or 4 minutes of walking it passes. That specific pattern, stiffness after rest that improves with gentle movement, is one of the most characteristic signs a physical therapist looks for when suspecting a poorly conditioned Achilles tendon. With caveats, since it also shows up in other conditions, but if it repeats every morning, it deserves attention. The second signal is heaviness and swelling by the end of the day. Sock marks, ankles thicker in the afternoon than in the morning, tired legs after a day spent sitting with no physical activity. That's the calf pump working below where it should. The third is loss of push-off strength, and it's the most silent of all because it causes no discomfort whatsoever. Let's measure it right now, because I want you to leave this video with a number of your own. Stand next to a wall or the back of a chair and rest a couple of fingers on it, just enough for balance, without putting weight on your hands. Lift 1 foot off the ground. With the leg still planted, raise your heel as high as you can onto your toes, then lower it in a controlled way. That's 1 full rep. Keep the knee straight and keep a steady pace, about 1 second per rep. Count how many you can do in a row without setting the lifted foot down, without bending the knee, and without stopping partway up. When your heel stops reaching all the way up, you're done. Do it with both legs and keep both numbers. As a rough guide, healthy middle-aged adults typically manage around 20 to 25 clean reps per leg, with quite a bit of variation by age, sex, and activity level. Below 15, there's clear room for improvement. Below 10, that ankle has gone a long time without being asked for anything. And pay attention to the difference between sides. A marked asymmetry usually points to one leg that's been compensating for the other for years. 2 more things you can check without any equipment. First, walk across your living room on tiptoe, without letting your heels drop at all, for about 10 to 15 yards. If it feels unstable, if your heels keep dropping partway, or if your calf starts burning right away, that tells you something clear about that muscle group's endurance. The second happens on stairs, going down. Notice how you descend. If you land with a dull thud, if your weight drops suddenly on each step instead of settling in, the ankle isn't cushioning in a controlled way. Going downstairs requires the calf to work by braking, lengthening under load, which is the most demanding kind of work a tendon does. A noisy descent means that control has been lost. There's a fourth signal, more subtle, that you can test on the spot. Stand with your feet together and start doing small hops, barely bending your knees, bouncing only with your ankles and forefeet. Gentle, rhythmic. After a few, you should find a rhythm where the bounce almost sustains itself, where the ground seems to give you back momentum with little effort on your part. That's the spring working. Every spring has its own frequency, the same way a swing gives back a lot when you push it at just the right moment, and slows down if you push at the wrong time. If you can't find that point, if every hop costs the same as the last, and you notice you're generating all the movement with muscle, the elastic system is not very available. That's a result, not a sentence, and it can change. An important warning before moving on. If sharp pain in the tendon, localized swelling, warmth, or redness appears while doing these tests, stop. And if you ever feel a sudden snap at the back of the ankle, along with a sudden loss of strength, that requires immediate medical attention. A calf that hurts with swelling, warmth, and redness with no preceding exertion also deserves urgent medical attention, since it could point to a venous circulation problem unrelated to what we're training here. The first thing almost everyone does when they notice a tight calf is lean against a wall, step one leg back, and stretch for 30 seconds. It's a pleasant move and does no harm. As a solution to the problem we've described, it has 3 holes in it. The first is that you're treating a capacity problem with a length tool. A tendon that returns little energy has a problem of stiffness and strength in the muscle tendon unit, not a problem of being short. Passive stretching doesn't increase tendon stiffness, doesn't increase soleus strength, and doesn't improve push-off power. It improves the feeling of tightness for a while, and that improvement is real, but superficial. Add what we already know about what actually changes with stretching. Sarah Wepler and Peter Magnuson reviewed the available studies in physical therapy in 2010 and concluded that the range of motion gains after weeks of static stretching are explained largely by a change in tolerance to sensation, rather than actual structural lengthening of the tissue. You reach further mainly because you tolerate the discomfort of getting there better. The second hole is one of aim, and almost everyone makes it. Think about the difference between the two muscles from Chapter 3. The gastrocnemius crosses the knee, the soleus doesn't. When you do the classic wall stretch with the knee straight, it's the gastrocnemius that gets stretched. The soleus is left almost entirely out of it. And the soleus is the muscle that holds your posture all day, pumps blood back up, and loads the spring with every step. The main character of the story is left out of the very exercise people do thinking they're targeting it. To include it, you have to bend the knee. With the knee bent, the gastrocnemius relaxes, and the load shifts to the soleus. It's a 30-degree detail that completely changes which tissue works, and it doesn't show up in almost any stretching video. The third hole is the most important, and it explains most Achilles injuries in people who start moving again around age 50. The tendon adapts to load, not to stretching. Mechanical load is the signal that stimulates collagen synthesis and changes the mechanical properties of the tissue, according to work from Michael Kier's group in Copenhagen. Without progressive loading, there's no tendon adaptation, no matter how much you stretch. And there's a timing mismatch worth keeping in mind. Muscle adapts fast, in weeks. Tendon adapts slowly, in months. When someone decides to get in shape and starts running 3 days a week, within a month they have considerably more available muscle than before, and a tendon that's practically the same as on day one. The muscle can generate forces the tendon isn't yet ready to absorb, and that's where tendinopathies show up. Before we get to athletic shoes, there's a daily footwear issue almost nobody mentions, and it's been acting on your calf for years. Heel height. And I don't just mean high-heeled dress shoes. Most everyday footwear, including many sneakers, has the heel raised several centimeters higher than the forefoot. With the heel permanently raised, the calf spends the day in a shortened position. Robert Chapo and Konstantinos Marganaris published a 2010 study in the Journal of Applied Physiology on women who habitually wore high heels for years. They found shorter calf muscle fascicles and a stiffer Achilles tendon than in the comparison group. The tissue had adapted to the position it spent most of its time in. The practical takeaway is simple and doesn't require throwing anything out. Spend more hours of the day with your foot flat, barefoot at home, or in shoes without a heel-to-toe drop, so the tissue also gets exposed to the other position. This applies to the athletic shoe debate too. It's true that a shoe with a very rigid sole and stiff heel counter limits ankle movement and reduces the elastic work that ankle can do, and that a foot that never works becomes less capable. The reasonable conclusion is to give the foot more chances to move. Walk barefoot at home, use more flexible shoes day to day, occasionally walk on uneven ground. The unreasonable conclusion, and I've seen it many times, is throwing out your shoes and going out for a 6-mile run in minimalist shoes on day one. The evidence on whether minimalist footwear reduces injuries is far from conclusive, and what is well documented is that abrupt transitions cause foot and Achilles injuries. An Achilles that's been protected for 20 years needs months of progression, not a Sunday decision. What actually works has two parts: restoring the ankle's full range of motion and giving it progressive load so the tissue has a reason to adapt. That's what comes next. The protocol has 2 layers. One is activation and takes 90 seconds, done before walking. Its goal is to have the system ready from the first step. The other is building, done 3 times a week. Its goal is for the spring to genuinely regain tension. I'll start with the 90-second one, which gives this video its title. Barefoot or in socks, next to the bed or anywhere you have a wall or chair nearby. First move, ankle rocking. 20 reps. Standing, lift your toes up, shifting weight onto your heels, then lower your toes and rise up onto your tiptoes. Back and forth, unhurried, moving through whatever range you have. This isn't about strength. It's about restoring the joint range that the night, or 3 hours in a chair, left dormant. Second move, slow heel raises, 10 reps. With both feet, raise your heels counting to 3, then lower them counting to 3. Slow in both directions. This repeated loading and unloading cycle is what biomechanics calls tissue preconditioning. A tendon responds differently to the first few reps than to the ones that follow, and a handful of gentle loads leave it working in a more efficient regime. It's the physical reason the first steps of the morning are the worst, and by 3 minutes in you're walking normally. These 10 reps do that work before you start walking, instead of during. Third move, heel raises with bent knees, 10 reps. Same as before, but with knees bent about 30 degrees, staying bent throughout the movement. You'll reach lower and feel the work go deeper into the calf. This is the soleus. This is the move missing from 99% of the ankle routines out there. Fourth move, small bounces, 20 to 30. The little hops from the earlier chapter, barely bending the knee, bouncing off the ankle, looking for that rhythm where the bounce starts to sustain itself. When you find it, stay there for a few seconds. You're loading and unloading the spring at its natural frequency, which is the most efficient way to wake it up. Fifth move, the first 50 steps. This one happens while walking. For the first 50 steps, consciously push off with the front of the foot at the end of each step, finishing the movement on your toes, instead of lifting the foot halfway through. 50 steps are enough for the pattern to take hold and keep running on its own afterward. 90 seconds total. Do it when you get up, before heading outside, or after a long stretch of sitting. Now the building layer, which is where the real change in the tissue happens. 3 days a week, single leg heel raises. Start with however many your number from the earlier chapter allows you to do with good form, and add reps gradually. Once you reach around 20 per leg comfortably, raise the difficulty by doing them with the front of your foot on a step, so the heel can drop below floor level for a full range of motion. After that, add a loaded backpack. Do half the sets with the knee straight and the other half with the knee bent. You already know why. Slow progression isn't excessive caution. A tendon needs months to change its mechanical properties, and impatience with this particular tissue comes at a high cost. On eccentric work, lowering very slowly, one thing needs to be said precisely. Håkan Alfredsson published an eccentric loading protocol for Achilles tendinopathy in 1998 that became a reference standard and is still used today. It's a treatment for an injured tendon, prescribed and supervised by a professional. If your tendon is healthy, the slow lowering component is already included in what I just described, and you don't need anything more. And add, at no extra effort, a habit drawn from Mark Hamilton's work. While sitting and working, keep the balls of your feet on the floor and raise and lower your heels continuously, at a comfortable pace, for several minutes at a stretch. The soleus can sustain that work without tiring, thanks to its slow twitch fiber makeup, and what you get is a venous pump and muscle metabolic activity kept switched on during the hours when they're normally shut off. One more adjustment that costs nothing and improves everything above: cadence. Every elastic system has a frequency at which it returns the most energy per unit of effort. Experienced runners tend to end up, without ever intending to, close to that sweet spot, because the body learns over many miles to find the spring's note. Something similar, in a gentler version, happens while walking. Try walking for a few minutes with steps slightly shorter and a bit quicker than what comes naturally. Many people find they can walk longer without tiring at that pace, because each landing makes better use of the rebound instead of braking and re-accelerating. How to know it's working, without relying on how you feel that day. You have 3 markers. The first is the number of single-leg heel raises from earlier, measured under the same conditions. The second is how many minutes it takes you in the morning to walk normally. If it's 3 minutes today and half a minute a month from now, the work is paying off. The third is the state of your ankles at 9 at night, compared with how they were in the morning. All 3 can be jotted down on your phone in 10 seconds, and none of them depends on how you feel, which is often misleading. On timelines, without easy promises. Morning stiffness in those first steps usually improves within 2 to 3 weeks, because much of that improvement comes from joint range and activation, which respond fast. The number of single-leg heel raises rises clearly between 4 and 8 weeks, and that improvement is mostly muscular and neural. Tendon properties shift on a scale of 3 to 6 months, and that's the part that gives back the energy. Repeat the test from earlier in a month, under the same conditions, and compare the two numbers. Tomorrow morning you're going to swing your feet out of bed and take 20 steps to the bathroom. Those 20 steps are going to be exactly as stiff as today's, unless you spend 90 seconds on what we just covered. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.